"Which one of them do you want for one night?" the father asked, his voice thick with alcohol, offering his daughters for the village's dark purification. The mountain man, a recluse everyone feared, unhesitatingly pointed at the young woman called Fat, the most unfairly judged. "I want her for life," he declared, breaking the silence with a promise that plucked her from shame and led her to a secluded sanctuary. Dubbed fat by everyone, she felt a profound shame, burdened by her own existence. The crowd's contemptuous stares reinforced her sense of worthlessness. Her weight was the primary cause of her public humiliation and ostracism. The protagonist's inherent goodness, ignored by her cruel surroundings, remained unseen. The listener empathizes with her undeserved pain and suffering, which filled her heart in that moment of disgrace. The scene unfolded in the village square. The protagonist stood exposed before the entire community. The crowd was a chorus of judgment, their stares and whispers like physical blows. Every judgmental gaze created a stifling atmosphere of shame and cruelty. There was no escaping their eyes. This underscored her outcast status and intensified her feeling of isolation. The people's reactions, from outrage to indifference, dehumanized her. Then her father, fists clenched, pointed at her. "Take her," he snarled, his voice laced with venom. "Worthless, just a burden. Sell her to whoever you want. Just get her out of my sight." These words, like sharp daggers, pierced her heart, confirming that she was nothing more than a disposable object. Her world crumbled. Hope died within her, replaced by a void. She was an object, devoid of dignity or a future. In that moment of humiliation, the protagonist's heart shattered. Her father's words and the crowd's stares pierced her like shards of glass. Bitter, abundant tears streamed down her cheeks, testament to unimaginable pain. And a feeling of utter worthlessness. The faint flicker of hope she had held was extinguished. She felt rejected by everyone, her family, the village, the world. She was a shadow, without a future, condemned to suffer. Silence. The protagonist stood, awaiting her verdict. The air around her thickened with whispers, jeers, and a sense of impending catastrophe. It was a moment of suspension, just before the intervention. Her gaze wandered through the crowd, searching for compassion, but finding only cruelty. Her absolute solitude in the face of collective contempt underscored the hopelessness of the situation. Silence hung heavy. The protagonist stood, awaiting her verdict. Whispers and jeers thickened, amplifying the sense of impending catastrophe. Her gaze swept the crowd, finding only cruelty. Solitude and contempt magnified the hopelessness. Suddenly, from the edge of the square, the mountain man emerged. His silent entry struck the crowd like a shockwave. Whispers and jeers died down, and the crowd held its breath. A cold, piercing gaze swept over the gathered villagers, awakening primal fear. The legendary recluse, his arrival was a defiance of their cruel tradition. He didn't look at Fat, but his aura enveloped her in an invisible shield. He was the silence that swallowed the clamor, a challenge no one dared to meet, a hope she didn't yet comprehend. His tall, austere figure cast a long shadow across the square, symbolizing change. An old, wind-worn cloak draped his broad shoulders, and tangled hair obscured his face. But his eyes, deep and unfathomable as wells, penetrated the soul with their cold observation. The powerful, merciless crowd shrank under his gaze, averting their eyes, sweating, and clenching their fists. The drunken father sobered instantly under the recluse's scrutiny, a tremor running through him, a sense of insignificance dawning. At the center of the drama, Fat felt a prick of curiosity, not fear. The man everyone feared had silenced the village's cruelty. The silence persisted. The compelled father cleared his throat. With a trembling voice, he repeated the ritualistic question. Which one of them do you want for one night? But under the recluse's gaze, the words sounded hollow, stripped of their venom. Eyes, filled with fear and anticipation, turned to the mountain man. Instead of pointing at the younger, desired girl, his thick finger unhesitatingly indicated Fat, the rejected, ridiculed burden. Muffled gasps spread through the crowd. Then, absolute silence descended. The recluse's choice was shocking, incomprehensible, absurd to the village. Fat felt her heart explode with disbelief. It couldn't be true, not her. The recluse opened his mouth, and his deep, calm voice ripped through the square's silence like thunder. I want her for life, he declared. In those words lay a promise that plucked her from shame, offering a lifetime in sanctuary. The mountain man's choice shook the square. The crowd, that chorus of judgment, froze in stupefaction. Astonishment and fear replaced contempt. Trembling, Fat felt the burden of shame shatter. She didn't understand, but the words for life sounded like freedom. The recluse turned. Fat, her heart pounding, took her first step. Each step carried her away from her father, the village, the burden of being fat. There was no farewell, only a silent departure. The crowd parted. She felt their gazes, no longer judgmental, but astonished. This was the beginning of her escape from a world that had rejected her, towards an unknown future with a man offering dignity. She was leaving behind shame and her old self. A silence descended, louder than all the shouts of judgment. The path led steeply uphill, away from the village and its cruel memories. The silence between Fat and the mountain man was thick, expectant, devoid of judgment. He walked ahead. Her gaze rested on his broad back. He didn't speak, didn't look back, but his presence was constant. Tired and disoriented, Fat felt each step carrying her further from her past. She feared him and the unknown. Yet in the silence, something new was stirring. There was no contempt, only heavy breaths and the rustle of leaves. When they stopped, he wordlessly handed her a water skin and some meat. It wasn't pity, but simple concern. There was no judgment in his eyes. Fat understood. This was not a world of judgment, but the dawn of hope, a promise she couldn't yet name. Still called Fat, trembling in the wagon beside the mountain man, she left the village, its cruel stares and laughter echoing in her ears. The silence of the journey, broken only by the rattle of wheels and her quickening breath, was deafening. She didn't trust him, expecting humiliation. He remained silent, his gaze fixed on the road. Was this salvation or just another prison? Her body tense, her mind feverishly tried to guess his intentions. Every moment was a battle between paralyzing fear and a flickering hope. She was escaping into uncertainty, away from overt disgrace. As night fell, the mountain man built a fire. Wordlessly, he offered her a blanket, warm food, and water. He didn't look at her, didn't comment on her appearance, treating her as a human being, not an object. His gestures, simple and practical, devoid of sentimentality, were revolutionary to her. She had never known such care. Astonished, she ate in silence. Tiny sparks of trust and respect began to sprout, though fear still held her firmly. Is this a trap? Questions swirled in her mind as she felt the warmth of the fire and an unexpected solace. The journey through the wild mountains became a metaphor for her inner transformation. The rugged beauty of the forests, peaks, and streams, though initially frightening, gradually seemed safer than the clamor and cruelty of human civilization. She observed how the mountain man moved with ease, as if he were part of the environment. She, always feeling out of place, began to perceive harmony in this wilderness. Each day distanced her further from her past, and the landscape mirrored her burgeoning strength and will to survive, even as she still felt like a burden. Days passed, each step deeper into the wilderness carrying her further from the echoes of village contempt. During their days of travel, hardly a word was exchanged. The silence between them became a new language, a communication of glances, gestures, and actions. Still called fat, she watched him, trying to decipher his intentions, searching for the trap she expected from everyone. He, in his silence, seemed to understand her fears without words. When she stumbled on the trail, he wordlessly offered her a strong hand. When she was thirsty, he pointed to a stream, waiting patiently. This minimalism forged a bond she had never experienced. Her inner monologue was filled with questions. Why? What does he want? Yet his constant, silent presence, his simple gestures were the answer. He was there, protecting her, guiding her. This built a foundation of unconditional support, free from judgment and expectation. Slowly, the weight of shame gave way to a hesitant yet genuine hope. After many days of silent travel, as the sun began to set, a faint wisp of smoke appeared in the distance above a thick canopy of trees. Through the thinning leaves, a small wooden cabin emerged, nestled seamlessly into the forest landscape. This was his home, a refuge whispered about in legends. For her, it was a sight that stirred a complex mix of relief and fresh dread. Did this place promise peace, or merely another, more subtle trap? The cabin, sturdy and simple, built of thick logs and deeply rooted in nature, was unlike the cramped, judgmental dwellings of the village. As the carriage slowed, her heart pounded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. It offered no luxury or embellishments, but in its simplicity lay the promise of asylum, a place where no one would judge her, where her burden wouldn't be a subject of ridicule. She began to grasp that this might be the true beginning of something new, far removed from the familiar shame and pain. They stopped before the cabin, the creak of the wheels fading into the forest's silence. The mountain man dismounted from the carriage and, without a word and with practical care, helped her down. She crossed the threshold, her breath hitched in her chest. The interior was simple, neat, and well-maintained. A fire in the stone hearth cast a warm glow on the wooden walls, and a comforting scent of burning wood and dried herbs filled the air. For the first time in many days, perhaps years, she felt a true warmth and safety seeping into her very bones. He gestured towards a simple bed covered with furs, then to a basin of warm water. It was no luxury, but a gesture full of dignity, offering rest and cleanliness. The physical relief was almost overwhelming. The long-held tension slowly receded. Surrounded by silence and unexpected warmth, for the first time since her memorable disgrace, she felt she could breathe freely. This was the sanctuary he had promised. His actions, as always, spoke volumes. First rays of sun. The night in the cabin was different. The fire crackled, the wind rustled. The fat woman, nestled in the furs, felt a loosening of tension. She had feared the mountain man, but his actions, a blanket, sustenance, water, spoke of care, not pity. Her wounded heart stirred with hope. For the first time, she truly slept. Before sunrise, roused by the rhythmic thud of an axe and the scent of wood smoke, she awoke. No judging eyes met hers. She rose, feeling stiff yet light. On the hearth, a pot of herbs and meat simmered. On the table, flatbreads and water, a silent, unspoken promise. She ate slowly. Warmth spread through her body, reaching her soul. Days passed. When he went into the mountains, she searched for her place in the cabin, feeling like a burden. The man never expressed disapproval. He patiently guided her, teaching her to start a fire. His movements were focused. Shame receded. She was observed, not judged. She learned from him to identify herbs, dry meat, and tend the fire. Each skill dispelled the shadow of worthlessness. Her hands, once clumsy, gained dexterity. Her body, once a source of shame, became a tool for survival. He never spoke of her past, treating her as an equal. In the cabin's silence, she rediscovered a dignity the village had denied her. Teaching and healing hands. With each passing day, her hands grew stronger, her mind clearer. The silent teacher showed her how to cast nets, distinguish tracks, and handle a knife. In his gaze, when she succeeded at something, she saw satisfaction, worth 1,000 words. She had once been ashamed of her hands. Now she saw them as tools of creation and survival. A silent revolution. One afternoon, while processing a hide, she cut herself. Blood flowed, and she froze in fear. The man approached, took her hand without a word, cleaned the wound, and applied a herbal salve. His touch was gentle, firm, full of care. In this simple act, there was more healing than in years of ridicule and contempt. She felt warmth, and in her heart, trust began to sprout. She understood that she was no longer a burden, but a being cared for. She began to care for the cabin with renewed dedication, cleaning and decorating it with dried flowers, desiring a beautiful sanctuary. Once, her appearance had been a source of shame. Now, her work became a source of dignity. He observed the changes. When he returned from the forest and saw braided grass decorations adorning the window, he paused. His smile was like a sunrise to her. Her inner monologue, full of self-reproach and fear, quieted. She focused on her skills, not on how she was perceived. She felt a growing strength, both physical and internal, learning that true worth lay within her, not in the opinions of others. The hands that taught her survival also healed her soul. In the sanctuary, she was reclaiming herself, feeling a right to dignity and happiness. Reflection in the stream. One sunny morning, by the stream where the sun filtered through the leaves, she leaned down for water. In her reflection, she saw herself, not the fat one from the village, but a woman with strong arms, hands marked by work, a tanned face, and eyes full of strength and serenity. In her gaze, there was no fear, but determination. For the first time, she felt pride. She touched her face, then her arms. Her body, once a burden, was now a tool for survival in life. She was no longer the fat one. She began to be herself, a woman who could start a fire, hunt game, identify herbs, and care for a home and herself. The village had seen only superficiality, but he had allowed her to see her true self. The reflection in the stream revealed her reclaimed dignity. Returning to the cabin, for the first time in a long while, she softly hummed a childhood melody. Her voice, once stifled by fear and shame, rang out freely. The man, returning from the forest, stopped, listening. His eyes softened, and a shadow of contentment crossed his face. Her days in the sanctuary, though not easy, were full of purpose. She learned that her worth didn't depend on the opinions of others, but on her own strength and goodness. From the fat one, she had become a woman ready for the future. Her perception changed. She was no longer a victim, but the mistress of her own destiny, though still unaware of the approaching shadow. Unspoken words. After the revelation by the stream, the shell around her soul cracked open. She began to perceive the mountain man differently. His silence and rare glances, free of judgment, were a language of actions that she instinctively understood. One evening, by the crackling fire, she felt an urge to share what had been stifling her. "My mother," she began, her voice trembling. The man, sharpening his knife, didn't look up, but his movement slowed. "She always said, 'I am a burden, worthless.'" Tears welled up, tears of release. Silence. He put down the knife, picked up a piece of wood, and began to whittle. In his precise movements and silence, there was more comfort than in any words. She continued, feeling the weight of years lift from her shoulders. My father sold me like an object. I was different. Her voice grew stronger, though still full of pain, as she spoke of the stares, the whispers, the loneliness. He finished whittling. In his hand lay a small wooden figurine of a woman, full of strength and delicacy. He handed it to her. Her fingers traced the smooth wood. In his eyes she saw an unspoken message. You are not a burden. You are worthy. She felt it in every fiber of her being, a profound understanding. The figurine became a symbol of her newly discovered dignity. She understood that the past and its wounds were part of her story, but they did not define her future. True strength lay not in superficiality, but in being genuine, kind, and capable of survival. The mountain man had taught her this through his actions and respect, without a word of condemnation or pity. Discovered strength days flowed in the sanctuary, and she, no longer the fat one, but a woman, more boldly took matters into her hands. This was not just learning survival, but the active creation of a life. She planned herb harvests, designated trap sites, repaired minor damages. Her movements became confident, her gaze determined. Once ashamed of her body, she now felt its strength and capability. One frosty morning, the mountain man returned from the forest with a scratch on his shoulder, a gash from a wild animal. Usually self-sufficient, this time he needed help. Without hesitation, she took the initiative. She cleaned the wound with warm water, her nimble fingers, applying an ointment from herbs she had gathered herself. Her touch was steady, yet gentle. He watched her. In his deep eyes appeared an expression of trust, a powerful song of her discovered strength. As she dressed his wound, she felt something deeper than gratitude or respect, a partnership. She was no longer just the protected one, but an active part of their life. Her skills and care were essential. This was a confirmation of her worth, stemming from within, from her actions. She understood that her strength lay in building a new life, free from judgment. She hummed more often too. Her voice, once stifled, resonated in the cabin and the forest, carrying melodies of inner peace. The mountain man listened. Sometimes, when she returned from the forest with a full basket of herbs, she saw satisfaction in his eyes, an echo of her song of discovered strength. One afternoon, returning from the stream, she saw something that sent shivers down her spine. At the edge of the forest, where the path led towards civilization, she noticed fresh human footprints, too numerous and close together to be coincidental. They led directly to their sanctuary. The vague shadow that had unknowingly haunted her thoughts now took concrete form. Old fears reawakened, testing her newfound strength. She knew the peace she had found would soon be put to the test. Months in the mountain sanctuary had brought a peace she had never known. But one day, a subtle unease began to gnaw at her. Distant smoke, strange shadows in the woods, or rumors from travelers all served as reminders of the cruel world outside. It was the first crack in their new haven, heralding danger. Old fears resurfaced, testing her new strength. Their peace was abruptly shattered by news from the valley. Her father, deeper in debt than ever, had offered her up once again. This time, it wasn't a village tradition, but a greedy relative or a ruthless moneylender laying claim to the defender's land, his precious minerals, and even the heroine herself as repayment for a debt. It was a blow to the heart of their security, a chilling reminder of being an eternal burden. Soon after, at the edge of their property, the heroine's father appeared, the man who had abandoned and sold her. His presence sent a cold shiver through her, rekindling memories of past shame and cruelty. He arrived with arrogant demands, attempting to reclaim his lost property or extort something from the defender. His sight reactivated in the heroine a sense of shame and being a burden, but alongside the fear, a new, quiet determination began to smolder. The father, his face contorted by greed and venom, was not alone. Behind him followed two ruthless thugs, their eyes vacant and ready for violence. They approached the cabin, bringing with them the weight of old shame and brutal threats. Their intentions were clear: to take what they considered theirs, the defenders' land, the precious minerals hidden in the mountains, and above all, the heroine, treated as valuable spoils in a cruel game of debt. The atmosphere around the cabin grew thick with menace, permeated by fear and old grievances. Their idyllic shelter, their haven, was under attack, forcing them to confront a past that refused to die. In the face of this wave of cruelty, the heroine felt old, deeply rooted fears reawaken in her heart. The sight of her father and the thugs, their merciless gazes, reactivated her sense of shame and of being a burden, the feeling that she was a thing to be sold. Despite the strength gained in the sanctuary and her rediscovered dignity, doubts began to gnaw at her. Was she worth protecting? Were her newfound worth, skills, and inner power enough to ward off the returning shadow of the past? Her internal painful conflict tested her resilience and self-belief. Her heart pounded frantically, her mind feverishly sought answers, balancing between her acquired strength and the fear of rejection. The silent defender, though silent, clearly sensed the escalating threat. His eyes burned with quiet determination, and his actions became decisive. Without a word, with precision, he prepared the cabin for defense, sharpening weapons, checking traps, securing the sanctuary. His unwavering stance, full of strength, was a source of hope and power for the heroine. He showed her that she was not alone, that his promise for life was serious, and that he was ready to defend their home against the cruelty of the outside world. Into the quiet of the mountain sanctuary, where the heroine had found peace and a sense of self-worth, echoed the cruel past. Her father, who had abandoned and sold her, returned with a relative and a moneylender. Their presence was like a cold gust of wind, extinguishing the warmth. They brought old claims, invoking debts and a tradition of purification that had humiliated her. Their words carried contempt, treating her as an object. The heroine, trembling, felt a new strength, cultivated in their safe haven. Memories of cruel judgments and being a burden returned, but they also ignited a determination to protect what she had gained. This was a fight for her dignity. The renegade defender, silent, sensed the tension, tracking the intruder's movements, ready to act. The atmosphere thickened, foreshadowing a confrontation that would decide if the past could once again engulf her. Standing face to face with the antagonists, her father, the relative, and the moneylender, the heroine felt her fears try to overwhelm her. Her heart pounded wildly, and her throat felt dry. This time was different. Images of the cabin, her work, and the defender's respect flashed before her eyes. Instead of fleeing, she took a deep breath. Her trembling voice, barely audible, rebutted the accusations and claims. It was not a cry or a plea, but a defense of her own worth. Every word was a victory over the fear and shame that had once defined her. She spoke of her experiences, hard work, and how she was no longer a defenseless girl. The antagonists, surprised, tried to intimidate her, reminding her of her past and of being a burden. But those words, though painful, no longer held the same power. The heroine, battling internal chaos, felt she could not give in. Her quiet determination was evident, and a spark of strength burned in her eyes. This was her moment to prove that worth doesn't depend on the judgments of others. As the antagonists, her father and the thugs, tried to break the heroine with words and threats, the renegade defender sprang into action. He needed no words. His presence alone was enough. He stood behind her, creating a physical and moral barrier. His stance was firm and unyielding, his gaze sharp as steel. It was a demonstration of strength and unshakable will. His silent determination spoke louder than 1,000 words, clearly communicating that attempts to harm the heroine would be met with resistance. He placed, a hand on the heroine's shoulder, offering support, then stepped between her and the antagonists, blocking their path. His movements were precise, reflecting years of fighting for survival. The antagonists felt the weight of his gaze and the implicit threat, realizing that victory would not come easily. The defender was not motivated by desire, but by a moral code and the need to protect the defenseless. His actions bolstered the heroine, giving her certainty that she had an ally who saw her worth. Bolstered by the defender's presence, who stood behind her like a rock, the heroine felt fear give way to courage. Her voice, trembling under the weight of past humiliations, now gained confidence and strength, like a stream after a storm. She confronted the antagonists, her father, the relative, and the moneylender, refusing to be manipulated. It was a counterattack of truth. With a courage that surprised even herself, she exposed their hypocrisy and cruelty. She spoke of how she had been sold, rejected, and humiliated, not as a victim, but as a witness to injustice who had found strength. Her simple words struck at the heart of their lies. She declared that she was no longer anyone's cargo or property, that her worth was not for sale. "I am not yours to reclaim." These words, spoken with power, became a manifesto of her freedom and dignity, resonating in the quiet of the haven. She rejected their claims, showing that her worth was not negotiable. This confrontation was a moral battle, in which the heroine became a voice for all the undervalued. The defender watched, proud of her strength, ready to intervene, but this was her triumph. She proved that true strength lies in defending oneself, even when the world tried to break her. It was a decisive moment in which she crossed the threshold from wronged to unconquerable, and her dignity shone bright as the sun. The heroine's words, full of truth and dignity, shattered the antagonist's facade. The father, the relative, and the moneylender, exposed, tried to resort to extremities. The father, in a drunken fury, reached for a knife, and the moneylender pulled out a pouch to bribe the law enforcement he had summoned. At that moment, the renegade defender intervened with decisive force. It was not brutal violence, but a precise action that neutralized the threat. With a single move, he disarmed the father, wrenching the knife away and throwing it to the ground. Then, with a menacing glare, he foiled the moneylender's plans, exposing the crimes and deceptions aimed at seizing the defender's land. The thugs, seeing the determination and strength of the mountain man, retreated in a panic. The antagonists were defeated. The father, publicly humiliated, forced to retreat, and the moneylender, exposed, banished from the defender's lands with a warning never to cross the sanctuary's thresholds again. Their defeat was both physical and moral. The somber tradition of purification was broken. Its mechanisms revealed as tools of cruelty and greed. The burden the heroine had carried throughout her life was lifted from her. The victory was not bloody, but clean and symbolic, confirming that strength lies in dignity and courage. The defender looked at the antagonist with satisfaction, knowing his mission of protection was fulfilled and the heroine was safe. After a stormy confrontation, a silence settled, filled with peace and mutual understanding. The danger had passed, and the heroine and the defender stood side by side, looking towards a bright future. No words were needed. Their eyes spoke volumes. It was a moment when their bond, built on respect, protection, and shared experience, was cemented. The defender gently took her hand, and she returned the squeeze, feeling warmth and security. They sat together by the fireplace as dusk fell outside, the fire crackling cheerfully. The heroine, free from the burden of shame and judgment, felt completely herself, accepted and loved for who she was, a strong, capable woman. The defender, once a solitary renegade, now had someone by his side who saw his kindness and strength, not just his formidable reputation. This quiet moment was a promise of a life together, built on mutual trust and love, born of unexpected circumstances. There were no grand gestures, only a profound sense of belonging. Her dignity was undeniable and her strength inspiring. Together, they looked at their sanctuary, which had become a true home, a symbol of a shared future, free from the shadow of the past. It was an ending that didn't need fireworks to be powerful. Its strength lay in the simplicity and sincerity of a bond that freed them from the past and opened the way to a shared tomorrow where love would grow as strong as mountain trees. How often does society judge us by appearances, ignoring the true value of the heart? This story teaches that dignity blossoms despite judgment, and true love, the kind that acts, sees beyond all flaws. The solitary defender, through his actions, restored the heroine's self-belief, proving that support builds unyielding strength. Once burdened by shame and rejection, she was reborn after humiliation, finding her own power. The irony of fate, the man of the mountains, perceived as a threat, turned out to be the only one who saw the heroine's soul. Society mistakes appearances for truth, yet true refuge is a person or place free from judgment. The defender's cabin became her sanctuary, where she healed her wounds and rediscovered herself, far from judgment. Hope, dignity, and true love always find a way, even in the darkest moments. This is the essence of our channel, celebrating the strength of the human spirit. Have you ever felt unfairly judged because of your appearance, or discovered inner strength after difficult experiences? Who made you feel valued? Where do you find your sanctuary in life? Share in the comments what touched you most in this story. Remember, this is just the beginning. Many other stories of the strength of the human spirit, extraordinary love, and overcoming injustice await. Thank you for being with us. Don't miss our upcoming inspiring stories.